Hello, my name is Ana Gomez, and today I'll be talking about El Salvador. The Salvadoran flag is a tricolor flag. The blue represents the great sky and the two massive oceans of Central America, and the white represents the peace and solidarity of the world. El Salvador is the smallest and most densely populated country in Central America. It has a population of 6,701,774. It borders the Pacific Ocean, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It is made of 14 departments for administrative purposes and 262 municipalities. San Salvador, which stands for the Holy Savior, is the capital of El Salvador. It is the country's political, cultural, educational, and financial center. El Salvador is also home to the most beautiful beaches and exhibits. It is also known for the land of the volcanoes. It is currently home to 23 active volcanoes and has had 26 eruptions in the last 500 years. Although there are a lot of beautiful things that are in El Salvador, there are also some devastating things within it. According to the Borgen Project, over 25% of children below the age of 5 experience extreme poverty in El Salvador, and 36% of the rural population lives in poverty. El Salvador also has the highest rate of homicide in the world for youth under the age of 19. Mara Salvatrucha and 19th Street are two of the most dangerous gangs in El Salvador. According to Berryman, a study in the 1990s found that at least 40% of the respondents of people from Latin America countries said that at least one family member had been victimized in the previous year. My main focus on my case study was to find how to help reduce violence in El Salvador. Let's start off with the history of El Salvador. In 1524, Spanish adventurer Pedro de Alvaro conquered El Salvador. Like most missions, the Spanish were in search of the precious gold. They were devastated to find that there was none. Instead, they used El Salvador's fertile land to cultivate many crops, most notably cacao plants. In 1821, El Salvador gained its independence from Spain, but conflicts over territory still became an issue. In 1823, it became part of the United Provinces of Central America, which included countries like Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. At last, in 1840, El Salvador became a fully independent country. Everything seemed to be getting back to normal, and the mass production of coffee introduced by President Gerardo Barrios was helping the economy flourish. However, after gaining its independence, El Salvador was left to be ruled by landholders called the 14 Families through a long series of military dictatorship. Throughout the 1960s and the 1970s, left-wing guerrillas and right-wing paramilitary engaged in a deadly spiral of political violence. In 1979, the Revolutionary Government Junta was created. In order to get back at the JRG, a Salvadoran army officer, Roberto de Albolzon, assassinated the human rights defender Archbishop Oscar Romero. He was eventually set free and founded the right-wing Nationalist Republican Alliance's party, or ARENA. The FMNL and ARENA still continue to be the most powerful political parties in El Salvador. The assassination of Romero led to more political violence, and eventually the Civil War broke out in 1980. The FMNL fielded a guerrilla army to oppose the government and the right-wing paramilitary forces. This was a very devastating war that led to a lot of U.S. intervention and killed around 75,000 Salvadorans. In 1991, FMNL is finally recognized as a political party and signed a peace treaty with the government. After the conflict stopped, however, crime rates shot up like never before, and the country is still dealing with the aftermath. In more recent news, in 2006, El Salvador became the first country to implement the free trade agreement with the United States. Now, let's talk about U.S. intervention. As stated before, the United States played a huge role in military assistance during the guerrilla war in El Salvador. The United States sent soldiers to train the military men in El Salvador. El Salvador was funded around $1 to $2 million per day in military funding during the Carter and Reagan administration. As we learned in the modules, one of the main reasons why the United States intervened with Latin America countries was to prevent the rise of communism and political left. The vast amount of military aid that the United States gave to El Salvador was a very good example of this. The Civil War affected many citizens. For instance, boys over the age of 15 were being forced to join the right-wing military forces. In efforts to escape, a lot of these young boys ran towards the guerrillas in the FMNL. El Salvador also became so independent of the United States military and economic support. Not only that, but it also led to a lot of human violations and massacres across the country. One of the most noticeable massacres was the massacre of El Mozote. Over the course of 3 days in January of 1981, approximately 1,000 people of the population of El Mozote were tortured and slaughtered. A monument of the victims had now been displayed in the town plaza. There are also some positive things that came from the U.S. intervention. For instance, the United States continues to promote economic prosperity, improving security, and strengthening government. Under the FY 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Act, Congress assisted El Salvador with $57 million to assist the Salvadoran central government. After the war was over, it led to a lot of crime. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, is a street gang that was born in LA. It was composed of immigrants who fled El Salvador's long and brutal civil war. They have a bad reputation for killing with machetes. MS-13 spread to El Salvador after the large deportation of illegal criminals in the United States. As stated before, after the war ended, so many people felt out of place in society and turned towards the Maras to make themselves feel part of something again. I am thankful that I lived a peaceful childhood, but things in El Salvador worsened about 5 years ago. I no longer felt safe when visiting my own hometown, and that is the reason why I chose to do my case study in El Salvador to learn more about what drove us as a nation to be in the situation where we were at. Chapter 15, Environment, really gave me a good insight of the corruption in El Salvador. One of the things that stood out to me was how Berryman stated a plan to reduce corruption and crime. One of the most important things that I feel like needs to be fixed is the policing system. Oftentimes, the police in El Salvador are poorly trained and receive very low incomes. This leads them to get involved in the corruption themselves. To reduce youth gang, I agree that as a community, we must find ways to reinsert these youth back into society. For example, instead of using La Mano Dura system, where gang members were punished harshly for any petty crime, they can switch to Mano Extendida, extended hand, which actually focuses on helping them on how to get out of the gangs and better themselves. In addition, the increase of corruption and violence has been a push factor and led a vast majority of immigration seeking for a better future in the United States. The United States is home to nearly 1.4 Salvadoran immigrants. Since 2015, crime rates have consistently declined in El Salvador, but it still continues to have one of the highest homicide rates in the world. Plan El Salvador Seguro continues to concentrate on areas of high crime, poverty, and gang presence. In summary, although we hear a lot of bad things from El Salvador, it is home to a lot of beautiful places and has some of the most kind-hearted people that I have ever met in my life. I do think that we need to continue to decrease the violence in El Salvador so that people can see the beauty that the country has to offer rather than focusing on the bad. In summary, I hope that you learned a little bit about El Salvador today. I know that it might seem that I focused more on a lot of the violence, but it was just something that I wanted to learn about myself because my family has been victimized by crime personally. I am very happy that I got to learn the history of El Salvador and how the country came about, and the early events and war that led up to shaping how the country is today. I think the history is important because it tells us the story of how something comes about. Also, U.S. intervention was something we focused in class, so it was cool to see how El Salvador was influenced by the United States and it still continues to be partnerships with them. Although it seems like the country is linked to many violence, there are lots of beautiful things that it has to offer. As shown in the video, and like I stated before, the people are very nice and hardworking and the food is amazing. If you ever get to travel there, don't forget to get a pupusa at your local pupuseria or maybe a cafecito at Pasteleria Lorena. These are pictures from last summer's visit to El Salvador. I hope to go back this summer and visit some of the places that I learned about throughout my case study. Thank you for watching.